All right, what is up, guys? I'm back. It's day 5 of Vlogmas, and I'm gonna be doing a video with the new iron stone. This is the new P3X. Thanks to Kevin Havinga for giving me this disc, or selling me this disc. It's the new P3X from Discmania in the Color Glow plastic. I also have a Color Glow P1 that is in my bag right now, as well as a Zone. So this thing to me is in between the P1 and the Zone, but I'm just gonna compare it in its flight and kind of show you how it flies different than these two and do a little review on it. So let's get it. So I'm gonna throw these all on a stock hyzer line and essentially just see how far I go and see how the flight looks. Here's the P1. So that's a flat, slight hyzer line with the P1. It essentially just went straight for a bit and then faded out. It never wants to turn over or anything, but it's starting to get to the point where it goes a little straight and then fades out. So now we will try the P3X. Try to throw it on that same line. Yep. Pretty much the same line, but instead of standing up right away, it just is fading the whole time. The reason I like it, and I think I'm gonna bag it, is because it has no chance of going too straight for a shot, but it doesn't fade out hard like the Zone right away. So it fades pretty much the whole flight, but it's a slow gliding fade while still completely predictable. Now we'll go with the Zone and just compare. So I kind of yanked that a little bit to the right, but you could see it wants to get on hyzer and fade down a lot faster, whereas the P3X was gliding in the air while having a slower fade and a straighter fade, whereas the Zone wants to fade more left and more aggressive down at the ground. So let's go get those distances. Guys, so the P3X was shortest at I think around 277, then it was the Zone around 290, and then the P1 was around 297. So it kind of makes sense because the P3X is a little bit slower than the Zone, and I also kind of got a hold of the Zone a little bit more, but I just threw it on a hyzer line, was fading out, got to the ground 277. So it's a nice reliable shot, but it's not coming down. So if you need something to land a little bit softer and just not get as big of a skip as a Zone, that's probably what I'm going to be using it for. And then the Zone is just, you know, reliable. If you need it to get left, or you need something that's not going to go straight, you need it to get down and you can throw it hard into wind, I'd say the Zone is probably going to be my slot for that and is what I really use it for, as well as forehands. And then the P1 is really for, I'm not really going to throw it in headwind ever, just because it could go straight and maybe even flip over. I'm going to throw it back into the headwind right now, so we'll see. But yeah, it's for like those 300-foot shots that I don't really want to throw a mid on, because a mid could go far or go more left or right. So this thing is kind of just a point and shoot. I drag it a little bit right of my target and just kind of slowly drift it in, and it lands flatter than both of these. So that's why I like these putters right now. Now we're gonna throw it back into the headwind, just see how they react and see how far they go now, because the P1 went further in a little bit of tailwind, but I imagine these will go further in the headwind. So same thing, a little bit of hyzer, a little bit of height, and it stood up, turned over to the right a little bit, faded out, and then just fell flat on the ground. If I threw it on a flat line, it probably would have turned and burned, but the fact that I threw it high, it kind of turned and then faded out, but it really didn't go very far. So now let's see this. I think I'm gonna like this disc for this shot. I think it's gonna be kind of how the P1 flies stock, but into a headwind. Yep. So it actually held the integrity more than I thought. I put it on that same hyzer line, it went straight in the beginning, but then still had a pretty aggressive fade. So, I mean, that's good because sometimes the zone into a headwind gets carried and then gets pushed hard left. So that's still gonna land flatter than the zone into a headwind, and I'll be able to push it straight without having the big fade into the headwind. Because if you put an overstable disc on a lot of hyzer into the headwind, sometimes it goes even more left. But now let's throw that zone. Oh my. All right, I yanked it again. So it went way right of my intended line, but it really just was on hyzer the whole time and slowly faded out right into the ground. It actually had a pretty similar flight to the P3X. That zone's also a little bit beat up, so compared to like a new Z zone, it goes a little bit straighter, but I think that zone is just gonna push a little bit further than the P3X. So depending on my distance, I'll use one of those into the headwind if I want to throw a backhand shot. But I think they're both really useful to have depending on kind of the angle I want to approach at. If I need more of a spike and stop angle, then I'll use the zone. If I need something that runs a little bit flatter and fades and falls into my target while landing soft, then I'll throw the P3X. All right, so back into the headwind. The P3X actually went the furthest, I think because I threw it on more of a laser beam line than the zone. I threw it on more of like a high hyzer line that got to the ground relatively fast. And the P3 went around the same, or the P1 went around the same distance as the zone, just because it was high, turned a little bit, and then essentially dropped straight down. So either one is good for a headwind. I think if I threw the zone flat like I did the P3X, it would go a little further just because it has more of a low profile and it'll cut through the wind a little bit faster. But we're gonna throw them all on a tiny bit of anhyzer and see how they pan out on that angle. Here's a P1. So I threw that high on a little bit of anhyzer, and there's actually a little tail right to left wind, so it kind of just held that line the whole time. I think it probably held it the whole time because it started to go into the right to left. But yeah, it didn't want to burn over at all. It just held over and then dropped straight down. So now let's see the P3X. I think it'll fade out a little bit at the end. Yeah, I put that on more of a low line and even more angle than the P1, and it essentially just turned until it landed flat and then slid forward. So it definitely has some more integrity. You could throw it on a low flex line, and if I put that on a little less angle, it probably would have faded out. So now the zone. Oh. Yeah, that came out a little bit early, but that is the zone flight. You put it on a little bit of angle and it flies, but then it fades out the most. So that's pretty much the difference between those discs. The P1 is essentially just straight with a little bit of fade. The P3X will handle more torque and more angle, so you could manipulate a little bit more. And then the zone, you'll be able to get those flex lines and get a little more skip out of it. All right, so that's it, guys. Essentially what this P3X is for me is just a little bit more stable version of my P1. So if I want, I could put it on a slight flex line and it'll come back, or throw it flat and hard and know that it's never gonna turn, as well as throw it into a little bit of headwind, which is where I can't throw the P1, but sometimes I just don't wanna throw the zone because it's a little bit too overstable or gets a skip. So it kind of fills that in-between spot perfectly. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.